السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، نحمده ونسبحه ونقدسه على آلائه ونعمائه، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، إلها واحدا أحدا فردا صمدا قيوما، نؤمن له بالربوبية ونقر له بالعبودية، من يهد الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا، ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وترحم على محمد وآل محمد كأفضل ما صليت وسلمت وباركت وترحمت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وصل اللهم وسلم على أوصيائه وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى من تبعهم بإحسان وإيمان إلى قيام يوم الدين. عباد الله، أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله عز وجل ولزوم أمره. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الذين آمنوا وتطمئن قلوبهم بذكر الله ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. God states in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, those who believe and whose hearts are eased with the remembrance of God, indeed with the remembrance of God do hearts find ease. Amanna billah, sadaqallahu al-aliyyu al-azim. Sometimes in life we may find that we may ask ourselves or others the following question. And that is, what is the point of religion or spirituality? Why is it important to have faith and to have belief? What's the point? What does it do for us? Why is it something that is necessary in our lives, something that we need to think about and we need to reflect on and we need to incorporate in our lives? You may find that sometimes you may have asked this question. You may have asked yourself this question, pondered about it internally. Or you may have asked someone else this question, or someone may have asked you this question as a person of faith. Now, in order to answer this question, I think that it is helpful for us to think about our lives comprising of two main realities. One we can call conventional reality, and another we can call transcendental reality. What do we mean by this? When we talk about conventional reality, this is basically the stuff of our everyday lives. The things that most of us are mostly preoccupied with. What are we preoccupied? If we think about our day-to-day, what are we preoccupied? We're preoccupied with school, with our education, with studying, with preparing for exams, with taking exams, with certifications, with degrees, right? Or, for instance, it may be our work. We're thinking about my salary. I'm thinking about business deals. I'm thinking about promotions. I'm thinking about my income. It could be my relationships. A lot of times, that's on a lot of our minds. My relationship with my spouse or with my children or with my parents or family or friends or others. I'm thinking about my physical health or my emotional health, right? Sometimes I'm dealing with issues of illness or sickness and many other related things. If we think about it, a lot of our time and attention is devoted to the stuff of everyday lives, right? To what we can call this conventional reality. And this natural pursuit of happiness that we try to acquire through our work and through our jobs and through our relationships and through traveling and through all of the things that we do in our, conventional reality, we find that it often monopolizes our attention. And sometimes the results of this, there's an upside and a downside. Sometimes the upside is that when you do get that job or that promotion, you become joyful, become happy. Right? You get a promotion, you become happy, right? You develop a relationship with someone, you become happy, right? You graduate from school, you become happy. There's an upside to a lot of this conventional reality that we have. But there is also a potential downside. And the downside to being preoccupied with the stuff of everyday life is that sometimes we may suffer certain pains of either attachment, right? I become attached to my job or my income, the salary. And so if I'm separated from it, what happens? I feel that sense of separation because I'm attached. Or to a person maybe, someone that I'm in a relationship with, right? Or to anything else. So the risk of suffering attachment and suffering anxiety, suffering from anxiety, and the sense of craving, desiring, wanting, right? And so we find that usually one day, especially if we experience a difficulty when it comes to any of this stuff of our everyday lives, if we experience a difficulty, we find that we suddenly realize at some point that conventional reality, even at its best, leads to dissatisfaction. Why is this? I'll explain in the following way. If we think about all of the possible scenarios when it comes to our material pursuits, the pursuits of this life, right? Logically, there are three possible scenarios. One scenario is that I don't get what I want. I don't get what I want. You want a particular job? You want to get into a particular school, for instance? You want to marry a particular person, and that doesn't happen. You don't get that job, or you don't marry that particular person, or you don't get that promotion, or whatever it may be. So this is one scenario. You do not get what you want of this material and conventional world. The second scenario is that you get what you don't want, right? We become ill. Who wants illness and sickness? No one wants illness. No one wants sickness. But sometimes we face illness and sickness. We face loss. We face deprivation. So the second scenario is that you get what you do not want. And the third scenario is that you get exactly what you want, but what happens? But at some point it ends. At some point it's over, right? These are the three scenarios. There's no fourth scenario, right? You either don't get what you want, or you get what you do not want, or you get what you want, but it ends. Sooner or later it's over. And in all three cases, you can see how it could lead to dissatisfaction. You're dissatisfied with all three outcomes and all three results. And so it leads to a sense of frustration for us, even at its best. Even when we do get what we want, we may end up dissatisfied and we may end up frustrated. So this is essentially our conventional reality, the stuff of everyday life, our material pursuits, trying to figure things out in this life, in this material and this physical world that we live in. So this is one reality of our lives. It is the conventional reality. The second reality of our lives is what we can refer to as the transcendental reality. The transcendental reality is where faith and belief comes in. It is when we believe in or we have faith in a higher purpose, a higher objective, something that is greater than the stuff of everyday life, something that is greater than ourselves and our material pursuits and needs and desires and fulfillments. And that is why faith and belief is important. You have faith and belief in something that is greater than ourselves, in a greater purpose, in a longer lasting purpose, one that is not just transient, one that is not even at its best dissatisfying. And this allows us, this transcendental reality, essentially what it does, it sets us free from the shackles of disappointment in this life. It sets us free. And this is why the Quran, very beautifully, it says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُمْ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Those who believe and whose hearts they find ease and contentment with the remembrance of God. And then the Quran says, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Indeed, it is with the remembrance of God that hearts find ease. This is the solution that the Quran tells us. This is the solution to freeing ourselves from those shackles and those pains and those sufferings that we experience in this conventional world. And we find that this transcendental reality, it provides for us a solution to all three scenarios that we talked about. Remember, what are the three scenarios of our conventional reality? Number one, you do not get what you want. Number two, you get what you don't want. Or number three, you get what you want, but it ends. This transcendental reality, it gives us a solution for all three scenarios. How? It solves the problem of 1 and 2, getting what you don't want or not getting what you want. How? The Quran tells us very clearly. God says, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. It may be, the Quran says, that you despise something, you do not want something, but in reality it's actually good for you. Or that you desire something, but in reality it's actually bad for you. This solves the problem, right? Because now it's not just about what this particular outcome is. Now we base our understanding on something that is greater. There's a higher purpose, a higher objective that allows us to transcend the immediate consequences of getting or not getting, of wanting or not wanting. So here, this provides for us a solution to scenario 1 and scenario 2. What about scenario 3? Scenario 3 is when you get what you want, but it ends. The Quran also provides us with the solution. God tells us in the Quran, وَمَا هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا لَهْوٌ وَلَعِبٌ. God describes this world for us as what? He says this world is nothing but amusement and play. It's temporary entertainment. وَمَا هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا لَهْوٌ وَلَعِبٌ وَإِنَّ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. The Quran says. It is the next life that is the real and permanent life. If we think of terms in terms of, actual reality and virtual reality. Virtual reality is what? Is that which is temporary. It's that which kind of keeps you busy, entertained for a while. And then what? Then you have to take your VR set off and you come back to the real life, right? You go online, you're on social media, you might be engaged virtually, but then what? But then you have the actual physical world, right? The Quran is saying the same. The Quran is describing this life as though it's like a video game. We come in to this life and, we play, we keep ourselves busy for a while, and then what happens? Game over. right? Even if you finish all of the levels, at the end, there's an end to the video game. And the Quran says, وَإِنَّ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. It is the next life that is the actual and permanent life. لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. The Quran says, only if people actually acknowledge and understand this. It's difficult. We're so preoccupied. We're trying to take care of things morning to night. We're always thinking of what we need to do, how we need to take care of our day-to-day, routines and needs and fulfillments, that it becomes difficult for us. Sometimes we're so preoccupied that we forget. The Quran says, don't forget. This time, this life, this conventional reality, it's only temporary, it's only transient. And it is the next life that is far greater. It is the next life that is permanent. It is the next life that we have to be able to work towards. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal-Asr. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونسبحه ونقدسه على آلائه ونعمائه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وترحم على محمد وآل محمد كأفضل ما صليت وسلمت وباركت وترحمت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد وصل اللهم وسلم على أصيائه وأهل بيته وعلى علي أمير المؤمنين وقائد الغر المحجلين وعلى البضعة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى سبطي نبي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل مخرجه وجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه. عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله عز وجل. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما هذه الحياة الدنيا إلا لهو ولعب وإن الدار الآخرة لهي الحيوان لو كانوا يعلمون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. So we have this transcendental reality, that faith, that belief in a higher purpose, in a higher objective, and that helps set us free from the shackles of the disappointments and the temporary and transient nature of our conventional reality, our life. But for this transcendental reality to be real, not just to remain in the abstract, not just to remain in theory, but for it to actually be real in our lives, it has to be what? It has to be experienced. It must be experienced. It can't just be something that we just think about, or that we speak about in the abstract or in theory. If you want to go on a journey somewhere, having a map is very good. But having a map by itself is not enough for you to get to your destination. What do you need to do? You need to actually follow that map. You need to actually take the first step. You need to get into your car, right? You can have the best navigation system, but if you do not embark on that journey, if you don't start, then you're not going to get anywhere. And so in order for it to be real, it has to be experienced, and it should not just remain in theory. There's a beautiful Zen proverb, an ancient Zen proverb, that says, I hear and I forget. How many of us are like this? I'm always like this. You tell me your name, I forget 5 seconds later. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember, especially if you are a visual learner. You see something and you remember. I do and I understand. You can hear something, you can see something, but it is when you experience and you do that you actually understand, right? And we find this is in our everyday lives. I remember reading a story, interesting story about a young man who had spent many years in pursuit of knowledge. He's a young scholar, rising scholar. And he spent a lot of time traveling from place to place in order to learn and to increase his knowledge. He went and he studied with various scholars and teachers in different lands and different regions, spending a lot of time. He went and collected and gathered as many books as he can. He read all of the books, he memorized books. And so in this pursuit of his knowledge, one day, this journey of pursuing knowledge, he arrives to a riverbank and he needs to cross the river. It's a large river. He needs to cross. So he finds that there is someone who has a boat, a small boat, and he goes and he hires him. He says, I'll give you some money, just get me across the river. So the man says, okay. And they both get into the boat. And the boat owner, he begins to row the boat, it's a rowing boat, across the river. And as he's rowing, he turns to the young man and he asks him, he says, so tell me, young man, what do you do? So the young man, he gets happy, loves when people ask him what he does. So he begins to tell the man about all of his journeys. I've gone here and I've gone there. I've traveled east and west. And I've studied with this person and I've studied with that person. And I've memorized this book and that book. And I've read this theory and that theory. And he's going on and on and on about all of the knowledge that he's gained. And as he's telling the boat owner, suddenly he interrupts him. The boat owner interrupts him. He says, sorry, young man, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have a very important question. He says, what is it? He asks him, he says, can you swim? Do you know how to swim? The young man says, what? No, I don't know how to swim. Why are you asking? He says, well, young man, because the boat is sinking. Right? We can know all of this information. You can memorize books and theories and understand. But if we are not able to apply, to experience, to learn, to do, then in many ways it becomes useless for us, right? This is why it's important for us to think about concretely what it means to have faith. Because a lot of people, they say, well, I have faith. I have faith in my heart. I'm a faithful person. I have belief in my heart. And that's excellent. Because that is the core. That is where faith begins, right? That is where it initiates. But it's important for us to then think about, okay, what does it mean to just have faith in your heart? Right? How is this faith then translating into the outer world? Is it translating in some way? Or do we keep it very safe and hidden in our hearts? Right? When we come to the Quran is very clear. The Quran says there are two elements, two ingredients to being successful in this life and acquiring salvation in the hereafter, in the permanent life. The Quran says what? Says we need faith and actions. Most of the verses of the Quran, when they discuss one of these concepts, they join it with the other. It joins it with the other. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. By time, the human being is at loss, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Except those who, number one, they believe, they have faith. وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Number two is for them to engage in righteous deeds. And to engage in activity, right? And so here we find that the Quran and our traditions, they encourage us to develop that faith, but also to translate that faith into positive activity, positive actions. And the relationship between faith and good deeds is one that is complementary and one that is reciprocal, if you think about it, right? When you develop this faith and you translate it into positive and good outcomes, good actions, those good actions then do what? They go around and they nurture your faith. And that nurtured faith then leads you, encourages you to do more and better quality good actions, and so on and so forth. So it's a reciprocal relationship. It is complementary, these two elements, these two ingredients, faith and good deeds. And this is why we find that the Quran, when it speaks about success, when it speaks about salvation, it doesn't just speak about success only in terms of those who claim faith, right? The Quran often reminds us that reward and goodness is for those who can back up their claims of faith, who also work towards developing that faith and translating that faith into good actions. And we find this in our day-to-day lives, right? You can go and you can get a PhD, you can go to medical school, you can go to law school, right? Spend all of that time and effort, but if you don't actually go and practice law, if you don't actually go and become, as a medical doctor, go and work and, perform surgeries and visits and what have you, if you have a PhD but you don't go and teach or research, it's not helpful, it's just a title, right? Where does the money come in? When you actually work, right? You can go around and say, well, I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor. Yes, that's great. You went to medical school, you got the title, but how are you going to afford anything that you want to afford, right? It's when we translate that claim or that abstract or that potential into activity. And this is why our teachings always encourage us to think about faith and good deeds. If we want a life with purpose, a life that is meaningful, where we are not just preoccupied with the stuff of everyday life, which, as I mentioned, even in its best scenarios can lead to dissatisfaction, because this life is temporary, it's transient, then it's important for us to remember that we are all on a journey. This journey is one that goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just like any journey, we have to ask ourselves, where am I going and what am I going to take with me? Where do I want to go? Where do I want to travel to? And what do I want to take with me on my journey? And this requires that we spend time and that we reflect and that we think about our priorities. We evaluate and we reevaluate. This is why the traditions, they emphasize on the importance of contemplation. Tafakkur, tadabbur, right? Some of the ahadith, they say that reflecting for a single hour is more valuable than a lifetime or 70 years of worship. Why? Because if you engage in worship that is mindless, there's no purpose to it, right? It's just physical movements. Whereas when you engage in any activity, including worship, after having reflection, thinking, contemplating, engaging in introspection, then this is what gives it value. This is what makes it worthwhile. Now, sometimes this may all sound to be burdensome for us. For me, just to focus on how I can develop my faith and my relationship with God, how I can do good deeds, how I can translate that faith into good actions. For a lot of people, that could be very overwhelming, right? For many of us, it could be overwhelming because the assumption is that I have to somehow be perfect overnight, right? Or if I'm just starting on this journey, where do I start? Seems like there's so much, a mountain that I have to climb. And this is the beauty of our tradition. The beauty of our tradition is that it encourages us to take small steps. It encourages us to think about how we can slowly develop. Slowly but consistently. Not to overburden ourselves. This is why the Prophet, sometimes people would come to him and they would ask him, they would say, Ya Rasulullah, there's so many things that need to be done. All these prayers and fasting and extra charity and all of this. What if I just stick to the bare minimum? And the Prophet would reply, yes, that's good. If you can be consistent in your daily prayers, If you can be consistent with small actions, that's excellent. That's a great way to start, a great place to start. But to have that intention of consistency, that I think about my relationship with God. How can I strengthen my relationship with God? What do I need to fix? What do I need to alter? What do I need to work on? And that I put an action plan and I strategize and I think of how I can take those steps in order to work towards developing my faith, my belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my relationship with God, and in adding to that works of goodness, positive works and good acts. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins and our shortcomings and to guide us to that which brings us the best of this life and the hereafter. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wal asr. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وأستغفر الله لي ولكم قوموا إلى صلاتكم يرحمكم الله صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين